just to sort of give a bit of an introduction, I'm Alex. I'm the grants manager for Northamptonshire Community Foundation. As a community foundation, we are an independent grant making charity. So we aren't connected to the local councils, though sometimes we do work with the unitary authorities, but we are a separate grant making charity. And there are grant making charities, community foundations across the world. They started in America, and the first community foundation in the UK started 50 years ago, so it's the anniversary this year. And Northamptonshire Community Foundation has been running for over 20 years, supporting philanthropists, donors and funders who want to give to their local community. So it's about place-based giving, so giving in the county, and supporting voluntary and community sector organisations within Northamptonshire. So that's just a little bit of a backstory to who I am and why I'm going to be talking to you about hints and tips on writing an application, because we see hundreds of applications come in every year. So we can tell you what works and what are some of the pitfalls and sometimes what sort of common mistakes are. So this evening, as part of this workshop, we've probably got quite a wide range of different organisations who are at different stages as part of this call. There are going to be some people joining us who are part of organisations that have been running for decades sometimes. Others, we have people who've maybe their organisations have started in the last 5 years or so, and there may be people who are just starting out and are looking to maybe set up their own VCSE organisation of some kind. So we'll start with the very basics. And the basics are making sure that you have got the right people in place for to be grant ready. So setting yourself up as an organisation that is able to receive grant funding. Part of that is making sure that you've got the right people in place, and also deciding what sort of structure that you want to be. So when you're thinking about the right people to have in place, there's a whole wide range of different skills that you need to have in order to make a community organisation work. You're going to have people, some people are going to be better at finance, some people are going to be better at organisation and admin, others are going to be better at strategy, but having a broad range of people who have different skills to help ensure the success of the organisation. And when you're thinking about what type of organisation to be, so whether that's a constituted community group or whether you want to establish with something that has more of a legal structure in place, you can, I'd always recommend talking to your local infrastructure organisations. So whether that is sort of the overarching infrastructure organisations like Aspire NN or the partnership that's over in West Northants, or whether it's your more local organisation. So within those overarching partnerships, so Voluntary Impact Northamptonshire, Sean as part of the Kettering and Corby Voluntary Network, Serve, whether it's Daventry Volunteer Centre, they should be able to give you some advice about what the different types of organisations are, what's going to best suit your organisation, where you're at the moment, and thinking about where you want to go in the future, and what's going to enable you to be able to receive grant funding. So once you've had that conversation in chat and you've formed and you have, we recommend that with community groups that there are at least 3 individuals who are not related in any way, so that there is this kind of sort of trying to think of the right word, you're in terms of there's no kind of invested interest in or anything like that. You've got transparency as an organisation, that you are working towards the same mission, but you aren't you don't have like this interrelationship with each other. It's that's most common with what funders are looking for is those that aren't related to each other in some way. You would then have to look about what the basic team systems are. So that can include things like safeguarding, making sure that there's policies and procedures around that, health and safety, also thinking about financial processes and procedures. And that goes on to my next point. So having a bank account in the name of your organisation that has at least 2 bank signatories, and thinking about those processes of who can access the money, having sort of finance committees and reviews, having those policies and procedures in place to make sure that not only are you financially sound and you've got strong governance in place, but as I said, thinking about those other types of policies that you might need. So whether it's health and safety, safeguarding, an equality policy, policies supporting volunteers, etc. There's a wealth of information out there on the internet, so you can look at organisations like NCVO or more local infrastructure organisations who can all help with that. It sounds a lot, but once you've got all those things in place, it makes it a lot easier. So we're now going to have a talk about project planning and also about how you're going to demonstrate the difference. So you've got your organisation ready, and you're looking at what you might want to be getting funding for. What we sort of a way of starting out planning your action and what you're looking to do with the project or activity or service that you're wanting funding for. You can have a look at this T-GROW exercise, but I'm going to show some other ways that you might want to look at planning as well. So one of them, obviously looking at topic or what the issue is. So as an organisation that's wanting to have a positive impact on the community, whether that be as a community centre or whether you're looking to work with older people or younger people, whatever that community might be, you might think about what are the issues that my community are facing. Then you'll think about what you want to achieve as an organisation. So often it's the opposite of what the issue is. So let's say, for example, you are looking, you know that within your community there's high levels of poverty and disadvantage. So you might say that as you know, your organisation's aims and goals are to help reduce poverty and disadvantage. And I'll go into a bit more in that later on about sort of looking at things from a way of identifying the needs and issues and then identifying what are the positive aims and outcomes that you want to have as an organisation and when you're planning a project. Reality. So thinking about where you are now in your processes. So, for example, what resources do you already have? Are there members of staff that you already have that could help deliver a project? Do you have a bank of volunteers that you already have, or a venue, for example? And what are you missing? So what do you need to apply for funding for? Then options. So what are the possibilities? So that may be that you've identified that you're in need of a venue. Is there a possibility that you could partner or work with an organisation who might be able to give you the venue in kind? So they're giving you that support for free as part of some partnership work. And then the last one is will. So how committed are you? And the reason we include this is because, as many of you who are probably on this call realise, is that when you are planning a project and delivering it, it takes a considerable amount of time and effort and will and commitment to see it through. Often when you're looking at applying for applications or putting in applications for projects and grant funding, it can take varying different amounts of time. So sometimes there'll be programs that you can apply to and you might hear back within 4 to 6 weeks about whether or not you've received the grant funding. And then there are other programs, particularly if you're looking for those larger sums of money, it may take 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, depending on the grant cycling for the grant funder, to apply to receive feedback about whether that application has been successful or not. And then that's essentially the start of it, because you then have to go on and deliver that project and do the evaluation and monitoring on it. So that's where that commitment comes in. So just to have a think about the planning of your project and how to this the reason I've included this is because I think there are some times when we see applications come in, and I imagine it's the same for other grant funders as well, where the group might not have everything included in their application. So for example, they might have identified an issue and they might have a plan of how they're going to help tackle that issue with a particular service or activity, but they haven't really maybe thought about the outcomes that are going to happen because of that. Or vice versa, you might say that a group comes along, they have a clear idea of what their project is going to be, why they're asking for grant funding, and they are sure that it's going to achieve XYZ outcomes, but they don't really talk about the issues that which has led them to create this project. So with this, it's a very, very basic form of a theory of change, where on the left-hand side, you can see the before, and this is where, as an organisation, you would be thinking about, okay, what are the issues that are facing my community? So it could be things like there are isolation, whether that's be, you know, for example, for older people that you might be working with, or young people, or for example, single parents. Whatever type of community you might be working with, there might be issues around, as I said, isolation, or it could be that you're working with a community where there's high levels of deprivation and disadvantage. So there might be issues around food poverty, fuel poverty. There might be issues, for example, around poor mental health or poor physical health. So you're thinking about, what are the issues that my community are facing? And then on the right-hand side, the after, this is what you would see as your impact and outcomes. So you're hoping to get person from point A, where they're facing a wide range of different issues, to then point B, where it's going to essentially be the opposite. So impact and outcomes often have words like reduced or increased or improved. So for example, we are looking to reduce isolation, we're looking to improve opportunities and aspirations, we're looking to improve mental and physical well-being, we want to increase access to services. Those are the sort of words and terminology that often use in grant making, and when you're looking to evaluate and monitor your project, you're essentially looking about how you can reduce the bad things and improve and increase the good things. And what we've got in the centre is your services. So it's how you're going to get your community from point A to point B. So what projects could you come up with that are going to be tackling those issues that you've identified and that are going to lead to those better, improved, positive outcomes? And that's a very sort of simplistic way of looking at it, but it's a good place to start, because those are the sorts of questions that are going to be coming up in grant applications. Have you identified what the issues are? What are you going to deliver? And then what are you expecting the outcomes to be? And then this is the sort of the next stage of that. So you maybe have come up with a whole load of different issues and needs that are impacting your community, and you're trying to you might want to whittle it down to a few that are maybe interconnected. So for example, we've talked about disadvantage, and within that there might be several things that are under that umbrella. So whether that's poverty, whether fuel poverty or uh, fuel poverty, or it could be that you know that because of the disadvantage that are impacting your community, it also has then a knock-on impact on their mental health as well. So there might be a one single issue that you're looking at, or there are some that maybe have that interconnectedness. You have also then, from your previous exercise, you've also then been able to identify what activities you want to deliver to support that. So if we do an example for, let's say you're a community centre, you have identified issues where the older people in your community are feeling socially isolated, and as a community, you've come together and you've thought, what are the activities or service that we could deliver to support that, or to tackle that need. So you decide that you want to put on a weekly lunch club that are going to bring people together. It's going to provide the older people that attend perhaps a hot meal that they can access for free, and then also maybe some activities that is going to help increase social sort of mixing, where they're going to build up friendships, interact with the volunteers, befriending, those sorts of things. And because of that, you're then hoping that the outcomes and impact are going to be things like reduced social isolation, maybe even improved mental health and well-being, perhaps improved confidence and self-resilience. And because they're getting out of the house and they're being more active, it could even improve things like their physical well-being as well. So you've identified the need and the issue, the activities, and then you're hoping that will lead to the impacts and outcomes that you've identified. So then what you need to do is think about the input stage. So this is where you're going to think about the sort of things that you need to put in to deliver that service. So, for example, if we stick with the lunch club idea, you might need to have that a member of staff or two that are going to help run that on a weekly basis. Or really, you might have volunteers as well who are going to run that. You might want to think about equipment. If maybe you're a community centre, you might already have kitchen facilities, but there might be additional equipment that you might need to buy in order to make sure that you could perhaps deliver 20 lunches or once a week. So you might need to think about the different cooking equipment and catering equipment that you might need. In terms of the venue, you, as a community centre, you might not need to obviously hire a venue, but there might be some core costs that are related to that. So you might need to think about, do we need to think about asking for support for core costs like utility costs for heating and electricity to cover that period of time on a weekly basis? And then you also might want to think about things like training. So whether that's training staff or training volunteers on things like health and safety, first aid course, or it could be safeguarding training. Or if you're working with food, it could be around obviously handling and dealing with preparing food. They might need some qualifications regarding that. And there are probably lots of other things that you might think of as well. So in terms of if you want to think about any transport that might need to be involved, or you might also think about how you're going to publicise that you're going to be starting this weekly activity. So think about all the different things that are going to be inputted into the activity to make sure it can help to work. And so this is a very basic information that you need to have in place when you're looking at writing an application, because having this already planned out, it saves a lot of time when then you come to do the application writing. So you've created that very basic plan. and you've identified the issues, the needs, what you need to deliver an activity, what the activity is going to be, and the outcome and impacts. So this is then when you need to think about the sort of research behind it. And this is in particular in relation to the need aspect. So it may be that as part of your work in the community, you might be receiving anecdotal evidence that that project's needed. So you might already be delivering a service or an activity in the community, and as part of that, the service users, the people who are taking part might feed back to you like, this is an amazing project, however we've also got this issue at the moment, which is a bit of a barrier for me to access support. Or so let's say, for example, you might be running a food bank service, and that is where you hear about the issues about isolation, or you might hear about from your community that there aren't very many services available in your area for parents with very young children to attend. So you're maybe gathering this anecdotal evidence from, as I said, your service users. There are other ways that you might get this as well. So, for example, you might be working with sort of partner organisations. There might be people, organisations that you're working with who want to signpost people to you. So if we take the example of a community centre who has been sort of hearing that there aren't many services available or activities for older people in the area, they might have also heard from an organisation like Age UK Northamptonshire, who say that they've had a lot of people referred to them from your area because there aren't many activities to do. And so you might think, well, how can we tackle this at a local level? Other examples might be you might have heard from public health or social prescribers who maybe work out of your local GP surgeries, who might be able to identify need. And then there's also the sort of hard data and evidence, which is the data and the stats and facts from public data sets. So that could be from public health, it could be government data sets, the census, for example, where it might be identifying a high need in your area. So whether that be around crime, for example, or it could be data sets around life expectancy, all sorts of information that's available out there that might highlight that there's a particular need. And as part of this process where you're doing the research about the need in the area and how you can evidence that need, as I said, anecdotal partners, partner or VCSE organisations, or from public health or local authority, etc. It would also be good to engage with your local community about what they would want. So you might have come up with some ideas about how to tackle, let's stick with the example of reducing isolation for older people, and you might have come up with this idea of having a weekly lunch club, but you then might be talking to obviously your target audience in your community, and they might say, actually, we don't want a lunch club, what we want is a karaoke night, or what we want is a dance fitness class, or something along those lines. It might be something sort of a bit more out of the box than maybe you were thinking. So it's always really also good to engage with that. So you're gathering evidence about what the need is, and then you can gather information about what they're after and what kind of projects that they want to engage with as well. And then it's also a good opportunity to think about what else is happening in the area. So you might have a look at, again, there might be other organisations. So there might be Age UK Northamptonshire might be running something. There might be other community centres or activities that are happening in your area, but there may be a gap in services, or there may be some reasons why particularly older people in your community aren't accessing those, and that might be something that you can tackle on a local level. And it's good to have a variety of different organisations doing a variety of different work, because it means that then if there are any gaps in services, you can obviously help hopefully meet those gaps, but then also people have got choice. So the example of, let's say you're doing a lunch club, it's okay that there might be a group that are supporting older people who are doing something that are that's in the evenings, or something that's happening sort of like a tea and chat in the mornings. There's normally enough space for people to do different activities and different things to cover different days and times across the week. And sometimes you might be doing something that's going to increase social sort of interactions, and then there might be another group who are supporting older people in a different way, but that could be through advocacy and support and advice. So be aware of what's going on around you, so you're not duplicating things, but also be aware of where this is a point where you might be able to signpost your service users to other support. So evidencing the need, we have got on our website, we have got information about data sets, so that you can get some of those hard data evidence. So on our website, in the our work section, we have two bits, two that I would recommend having a look at. One is Northamptonshire Insights. When you go onto this page, you'll be able to scroll further down, and what you'll see is that we've worked with an organisation called Local Insights, who their sort of role is to gather all of the data from all of the sort of public sets of information that's out there and make it geographically specific. So for example, I could go onto Local Insights and I could say, right, I want to know all the information about a specific ward or a specific town, or a specific unitary authority, and I can look at it at lots of different levels. What we've done is to publish some of those data sets on our website, so that as organisations, you can use them as part of your evidencing need. So, for example, we've got one for West and North, and there's another one for Northants. We then have it broken down into areas, so Northampton, Corby, Kettering, East Northamptonshire, South Northamptonshire, etc. So it can be a more local level. And then also a couple of years ago now, we had an updated version of our Northamptonshire Hidden Needs. So that's where we've worked with the University of Northamptonshire, who looked at all of the data about Northamptonshire and identified the priority needs in the area. That's more of a higher level, so just looking at West Northamptonshire and North Northamptonshire. But again, there's lots of interesting data in there, where if you were applying to Northamptonshire Community Foundation, you can use that as evidence, but we are more than happy for you to use that as evidence if you're applying to other funders as well. So please go ahead and have a look at that. It's there for you to use to back up and support your applications. So you've now done your planning, you've got your evidence of need, you've got a plan of action in place about what you want to do, and you're ready to start looking for funding. So you've gone out and you've identified some funders that you might be able to fund your work. Obviously, the main important thing to think about is checking that you are eligible to apply. Every funder has got slightly different eligibility criteria. Some funders only fund local work. So, for example, us in Northamptonshire Community Foundation, we're funding projects that are happening in Northamptonshire and supporting Northamptonshire organisations. There are other funders who fund nationally, but they might, for example, only fund arts projects like the Arts Council, Or you might have funders who are more general. So, for example, like the National Lottery Community Fund, who are funding a whole wide range of different projects across the country. So it's finding what's the right funder for you. Some of them are going to be thematically specific, some of them are going to be geographically specific, and some of them will fund only certain types of organisations. Some will fund only charities, some will fund a whole wide range of not-for-profit organisations. You really just have to check the eligibility criteria to make sure that you're applying to the right funder and that you're not going to waste your time. Then once you've checked that you're eligible as an organisation, it's then making sure that your project is eligible as well. So if you're looking at a funding programme and it's there to support a specific type of work, does your project fit into that? Another thing to look at is the timeline. So as I mentioned at the start, some grant funders have rolling programmes where you can apply at any time and you might find out within sort of 4 to 6 weeks about whether or not you've been successful. Some grant funders they might be running a program where there are multiple rounds, and the decision-making process takes quite a few months to go through. Other funders may only give out on an annual basis. You really have to have a look at the timeline, because we do on occasion sometimes have groups, organisations who come to us and say, oh, we're having a project or an event that's going to be starting next month, in 4 weeks' time. Can we apply for funding? And at that stage, it's too late. I would really recommend that if you're looking for grant funding, to leave yourself at least 3 months before your project starts to apply. And then, as I sort of said earlier, if you're looking for a larger amount of money, you may need more time. You might be looking at something more like 6 months, possibly 8 months, to sort of plan and put in applications, find out if the decision-making process time, and then finding out whether or not you've been successful. So please don't leave it to the last minute. Also, speak to the grants officers if you can, so whether by email or phone. If there's anything that you're unsure of, give them a call or have a chat with them. Other ways that you can have a look about whether or not they might fund your type of project and your type of organisation is looking at what they've funded in the past. They might publish their information on their website, but there's another sort of a place where you can have a look at things. Not every funder is signed up to this, but a lot of them are, and it's something called 360 Giving Grant Nav, as in grant navigation. 360 Giving is a place where funders can publish their data about who they've funded and for how much. And it's part of being an open and transparent grant making organisation. So that's another place where you can have a look about who's being funded in your area, who are the funders, what other organisations exist. So a really useful tool. You might also want to check around if you need match funding as part of your application or proposal, or if they will fund the whole project. And last of all, obviously, we don't try to shoehorn your project to fit a programme. If it doesn't fit, then don't waste your time applying. Try and make sure that if it's, for example, it's a project that's supporting health and well-being, a funding programme that's for health and well-being, that is part of your project. It is going to have a health and well-being outcome. So planning your application. So part of this is obviously making sure that your main contact is well briefed on the project. Sometimes someone in your organisation might be writing the application, but they're not necessarily the main point of contact for your organisation. So you might want to put down that main point of contact as your chair or your CEO, but they might not be the ones that are actually writing the application. So make sure that they're well briefed, because the grant funder might get in contact with them. I'd recommend doing a draft form of your application. So you might do that on a Word document, or if it's an online application, they might give you the ability to save as you're going along. But I'd always recommend having some kind of Word document in the background, because we all know that sometimes technology is not our friend, and you might have be writing an application and it there's a glitch and it disappears. So have some type of draft version that you've got saved somewhere. Don't assume that the funding organisation knows who you are in the track record. So sometimes, because you're so involved in your organisation, your project, that you might be explaining things which you think are really obvious, but as an outsider, they may not be aware of. So really think of, when you're writing your application, that this is somebody who might not know your organisation at all. And even if it's someone who you've had regular funding from in the past, it might be being looked at by a new assessor, it might be looked at by new grants panel members who've never heard of your organisation before. So try and treat it, when you're talking to the organisation through your application, as if they don't know who you are. Some things I've already mentioned, such as allowing yourself plenty of time. Describe the project, not what you're trying to achieve. Sometimes groups can get a bit fixated on the outcomes and how they're going to fix all of the problems, but then don't necessarily get down to the nitty-gritty of who is it for, why is it needed, when and where is it going to happen, what exactly you're going to deliver. So for example, we're going to have a lunch club from 2 till 4 every Tuesday. It's for 6 months to support people during the colder months. That kind of detail is needed and sometimes gets missed out by accident. And then, as I've sort of mentioned as well, try and make sure that it's concise and you're painting this clear picture for the grants panel and the grants assessors, who can get an understanding of what the project is and activities that you want to deliver. Here I've got some examples of sort of possible grant application questions. So how are you going to spend this grant? Please describe the work that you're wanting us to fund. This is when you give that detail of who is it for, what is it, what are the activities that you're going to be delivering, what's the service that you're going to be providing, how often is it going to be taking place, who is going to be delivering it, also how are people going to find out about the project. So whether they're going to be referred in to your organisation from local authorities or the VCSE organisations, can people self-refer, those sorts of questions when you're really describing what the activity is. Then there's normally going to be a separate question which is going to be asking you about the need and disadvantage. So this is where you're letting the grant funder know what those issues are that you've identified, and you're going to use that research that you've put in to describe how you know that need exists and what the issue is, and obviously using that hard and soft data to describe how you're going to what the need is that you're going to be trying to tackle with your project. There might also be another question in there that might talk about how you know that the community are going to engage with your project. I often give this example because I think it really sort of neatly describes it, where as an organisation, let's say that you are a village hall and there's a lot of antisocial behaviour in your village because there's a lack of activities for young people in your area. So as a committee, you've got together and you thought, right, what can we do to help support young people? I know, we're going to buy a pool table, we're going to put it in the village hall, and then all the young people are going to come along and play pool rather than being on the streets and being vulnerable to taking part in antisocial behaviour. Great, fantastic. So you ask for a grant and you get the grant and you're successful. You buy the pool table you've spent X amount of money on this pool table, but then you find that no young people end up turning up, because you then find out after the fact that young people, they come back to you and say, well, we're not interested in playing pool. We don't like pool. We want to do something else completely different. So there may be a question in there about how you know that your community are going to engage with the project. And that might be that you've done some surveys. It might be that you have, this might be an existing project that's run very successfully, and you can demonstrate that a large number of people, or an appropriate amount of people, access your services and get a lot of benefit from it. But think about also how you're going to engage with the community. Then there'll often be a question about the impact and difference that your project's going to make. And again, you've already done that work because you've identified what the issues are and what the positive outcomes are going to be. So you can talk about how you're going to, reduce social isolation or increase access to services. And you've already got that planned out to be able to answer that question. And you might also want to link it back to the project. So we think this is going to reduce isolation because we're giving opportunities for people to mix and come together and socialise, etc. Then there's going to be a question about how you're going to know whether or not the project's been successful. So how are you going to measure and report back on those positive changes that you've achieved? So, for example, how are you going to know that you've reduced social isolation for older people? Are you going to do a survey to sort of find out how they're feeling after 6 months of attending? Are you going to have one-to-one chats, because that might be a better way of gauging feedback? If you're for example, working with younger people, there might be an opportunity to have a fun, interactive way of getting their feedback. There might be case studies. So, for example, you might have observed the changes of somebody over a period of time and the positive effect that your activities had on them. So you've got to also think about that and plan that, because if you are successful and you get the grant award, then that's going to be a big part of your responsibilities to reporting back to the funder to say how that money has had a positive impact on your community. Budgeting. Make sure that you're budgeting accurately. So you try not to inflate. Make sure that you again do research around how much things are going to cost, and you've again, this might be part of what we've already covered with the input aspect, where you've looked at all the things that you're going to need to pay for as an organisation to run the activity, and make sure then that you are getting quotes where you need quotes, that it covers all of the different areas that you've outlined. There might be areas where you are getting in-kind support that you should identify, and there are others that obviously, if you're specifically asking the grant funder, that you need to make clear. So you need to be specific when you're giving a budget breakdown. So an example of that is, for example, we've broken it down into sort of the broad budget heading, so capital costs, staff costs, volunteer costs, operational activity costs, and then sort of overheads, office and premises costs, and publicity costs. So, for example, if you just say, let's say with the office and overhead costs, you just say that you want in the breakdown £500. That's not enough information to go on. So we want to know, okay, how is that going to be used? So you might say, well, we are going to use the £500 is going to be used to support venue costs, because we have to hire a venue at, let's say, £10 an hour for X amount of sessions that last 2 hours. So you're giving us that breakdown and sort of explaining how you've come to that sum of money. The same with staff costs. Think about what's their hourly or salary pay, what's their role within the organisation. Funders don't want to see vague numbers. They want to see that how you've come to that figure. So how do you know need £1,000 for staff costs, or how do you know that you need £5,000 for capital costs? So some more sort of general hints and tips. So make sure that the application is easy to read and understand. Check your application, and if you can, get somebody else to proofread it for you before you send it. There are lots of times, particularly in the budget section, there are probably, maybe 50% of the time we come across that there are errors in the budget because people haven't double checked they're adding up. So please make sure that you do that and allow yourself enough time to have a draft sort of read through and proofreading, so that you're not submitting it last minute, because that's when you're more likely going to have errors. Avoid abbreviations and acronyms and jargon unless you've explained it beforehand, because there are going to be some funders who are experts in a particular area. So let's say like the Arts Council or Sport England, it's a specialist at their area that they're looking at. But there are a lot of funders who are funding general, sort of a whole wide range of different projects. And so they're not necessarily going to be a specialist in a particular area. So make it clear for them to understand. And also, don't start your project until you've received an answer on funding, because if you start paying for things or buying equipment, the grant won't be able to cover it because there is no retrospective funding. So if you already go ahead and let's say buy a cooker for your project or some equipment for your sports club, before you've had it agreed that you've been successful, then the grant award can't cover it. Think about sustainability. So how is your project going to continue after the grant has been spent? Are you going to have a look at ways of reducing the cost of the project? So, for example, a volunteer is going to take it over. Are you going to have different sources of income, such as maybe corporate sponsorship? Are you going to work on your sort of donations and income strategy? Are you going to try and charge a sort of membership fee? Think about all those things about how it's going to be sustainable rather than just purely relying on grant funding. If you're successful, make sure that you read the grant agreement and contract, because in there you're going to have the responsibilities of what you need to do as a grant recipient and what the roles and responsibilities are for the grant funder. Often there are going to be things in there like being publicly acknowledging that you've received the award. So whether that's on social media, obviously in your accounts, on your website, thanking the donor, thanking the funder for your for the award that you've received. And also there'll be information in there about how you need to report back to the grant making organisation and what that needs to include. So, for example, evidence of spend. If your application has been rejected, sometimes funders will give you feedback at the point of rejection. Some you might need to approach them to ask for feedback about how you can improve for the next time, but don't be afraid to ask for feedback, because the worst thing they can say is no. But many of them will say yes. So just a quick note about what happens if they don't have an application form. Some funders might want video submissions, some might want a letter. In your video or your letter, try and include the things that we've talked about already. So identifying a need, how you're going to tackle that need, what you need in terms of a monetary value to be able to do that, what are the positive outcomes, how are you going to measure that, and how does that fit in with the funders' aims and objectives and meets their purpose as a charity or a trust. So to sum up, make sure your organisation is grant ready, understand that the issues understand the issues that are in your community, what you're trying to tackle, have a clear plan about the activities that you want to deliver and what are the outcomes and impacts that you're going to achieve. Talk to other people and do your research, and then make sure that you're reading and checking the eligibility criteria and the guidance. information, and then get advice from your local infrastructure organisations and someone to proofread the application before you submit it. Here are the contact details for NCF if you're interested in any of the grant funding that we've got available at the moment. I'd also, as I said, throughout, check in on the Aspire NN website for more information. There is lots of upcoming webinars and sessions that are going to help your organisations moving forward as well, whether that's looking for grant funding or thinking about other areas like governance and AI, which is a new thing that's coming into the grant and charity world. So I imagine lots of people will be wanting to go to that session as well.